This week, the organizers of the Boston Marathon, the Boston Athletic Association, potentially broke hundreds, if not thousands, of runners' hearts by announcing drastic new changes to its qualification policy. Before we get into this here, take a deep breath. This isn't until 2027. So if you're thinking about running the race next year, don't have to worry about this yet. If you ran a nosedive of a downhill course to qualify, you're still good for 2026. But beginning with the 2027 qualification window, which is, guys, help me out here. It's from
September, whenever registration closes in September of this year, right?
So it's mid-September 2025, all the way until when registration for 2027 closes in mid-September 2026.
Right.
That window will be affected. So if you're thinking of running the 2027 Boston Marathon, pay close attention here. This will affect extreme downhill courses, of which there are a surprising number. We discovered this week in reporting this story. Caitlin, let's unpack the nuts and bolts of this new qualification policy.
Okay. I like how you're turning to the trail runner to talk about elevation here. So we're going to, yeah, right. I've done plenty of elevation. So runners who want to qualify on a net downhill course are going to face time penalties. So if it wasn't enough that they just knocked 5 minutes off most all of the qualification times, now if you run a net downhill course, you're going to face a 5 to 10 minute time penalty. So let me get into the details. This is going to be called indexing. Okay. So if you run a course with 1,500 feet to 2,999 feet of net descent, you are going to be slapped with a 5 minute time penalty.
Oof.
5 minutes.
That's a lot.
That's a lot. So you've got 5 minutes off the top for these new qualifying standards. Usually, or most recently, an almost 7 minute cushioning that you need between your qualifying time and actually getting into the Boston Marathon. And now they're talking about even taking off more time if you decide to do it on a net downhill course. So there are more categories here. If the course has between 3,000 and 5,999 total net descent feet, right? We're still talking in feet. You're going to get slapped with a 10-minute penalty. So watch out Revel races, right? That some of them fall into each of these two categories. And anything with over 6,000 feet of net descent is just disqualified from Boston qualifier eligibility in general, right? They're not even going to be eligible with time constraints or not. So this change is a big response to all of the recent data, right? We have people with faster times. We have more people trying to get into the Boston Marathon. And so they're seeing that these steep courses can give somewhere between a 3 to a 6 minute advantage. Guys, maybe we have a little more information on that about how much time you're getting or you're gaining by running these downhill courses. So they decided to come in and say, okay, we're going to slap some penalties on for those courses that have a net descent.
Yeah, so the BAA, I guess, in the last couple of years, the popularity of this event and of marathon majors overall, which is something we've talked about in the podcast before. It's something we've reported out on our site quite a bit. It's just grown exponentially in the last few years. Post-COVID, there's been this massive running boom that we've talked about a lot, and younger people are certainly getting into running. And the big draw is the marathon majors. The Boston Marathon, sort of the grand poobah. It means you've kind of arrived. It's the People's Olympics. And last year, the BAA declined the application of 12,324 runners who qualified.
Wow.
Wild.
Who ran a qualifying time in their age group. So they turned away about more than a third of what they can handle. They cap it at about 30,000 runners overall. And then they did this because they do this kind of rubric of math where it's everyone applies and then they start to figure out how much lower than the qualification time they have to set the bar. Last year it was you had to run 6 minutes and 51 seconds faster than your age qualification time, which for let's say an open male runner, 2:55 is going to be the new qualification number for this year. So if that 6:51 holds, that means you have to run like a was like almost like a 2:48 and change just to qualify for the Boston Marathon. That's a massive number.
That's
of
wild.
Wow,
Yeah, that's
yeah.
wild. So you're looking at 4 minutes a kilometer. If you can't hold 4 minutes a kilometer for a full marathon, you don't qualify. So
Oh my gosh.
So when I saw those standards, I thought, well, this is probably a way for the BAA to just cut down the amount of people who qualify. And I'm not saying it's a bad way. It's a fair way. It's going to piss some people off, but also like, how are you going to bring that number down in a way that seems fair? And I mean, is it fair? Is it fair?
Let's get into it. I mean, okay, so first of all, I didn't know this, but apparently upwards of 10% of qualifiers for the 2025 race qualified with a race that potentially would fall into this elevation indexed bucket of 5 minutes or more of penalties. So that's a pretty significant number. That's 3,000 people by my rough estimate here. If it was 30,000 entrants into the Boston Marathon. So that is thousands of people that would be affected by this rule change. There's an entire cottage industry that is built up around Boston Marathon qualification.
Right.
I think about races like the California International Marathon, which is a great race, a generous race, a net downhill race, doesn't fall into this sort of penalty window here, but it's one of these types of races where you cross the finish line. I believe there's a bell at the end where you can ring the bell. I think it's if you qualify for Boston. So there's an entire ecosystem, a feeder system around the Boston Marathon that's grown out. The Revel races.
Yes.
Caitlin, you've run a Revel marathon. Revel, like for the uninitiated, unpack the Revel experience for us.
Yeah, the Revel marathons usually have a net loss, elevation loss, and their marketing system is all based around BQs, right? Boston qualifiers. A ton of people travel to go and run these races because they want to get a BQ, and they have a great downhill at some point. There's some more than others. I ran the White Mountains Marathon, which I think they tried and then they canceled. I don't think it's going to happen again. But it wasn't as severe as the one I think is in Las Vegas, or the Charleston Marathon. Yeah, which has an incredible net downhill. However, the White Mountains race also had a net downhill. It did have an uphill in the middle there, which was kind of tricky, but I loved it. I mean, I'm a trail runner. I love running downhill. So I was really excited for this race because I just wanted to pound the whole thing. Well, that wasn't very successful because when you got to the uphill, you're like, wow, my legs don't work anymore. So it has its own science to it, right? Running a downhill. But did it help? Yeah, I was able to run at a faster pace than I was planning to run for the entire downhill part until I burnt out because, just kind of letting gravity take you away. Your rate of perceived exertion is well below what you would have been running at that marathon pace on flat ground. So does it help? I feel like it did help me. If I could have avoided the little burnout that I had in the middle, I think I would have even done better. But it is a fun experience. It's not, but I don't know if that's an advantageous race for everyone. Maybe not everyone runs a downhill race as well as a flat race because, like I said, you can totally trash your quads and then you're done halfway through.
Yeah, I'm looking at those numbers, 1,500 to essentially 3,000 feet. And to contextualize that, that's so much downhill. So you mentioned the CIM, the California International Marathon, Michael. That inside of running circles, especially running nerd circles, is seen as kind of the closest you can go to the fringe of downhill races that still count for a personal best. Like there's kind of this unwritten thing that when you run a race that's super downhill, the personal best kind of doesn't count because it's implied that you've gone faster because of it. And the California International Marathon is on the fringe, and that's only like 400 feet of net downhill. Mm-hmm. So I'm trying to wrap my head around, like, run a race that's 3,000 feet of net downhill, and unless, like you say, Caitlin, unless the downhill itself puts you at a disadvantage because it changes your mechanics, like you should be looking at a 5-minute advantage at least, right?
Imagine 6,000.
Yeah,
this is just it. I mean,
that's like rolling the cheese down the hill. You know, what's that sport? Where, is it in Scotland? I might be butchering that. They like throw a cheese down a hill and you got a bunch of people running after it.
It's in the UK. I think it's called the Wheel of Cheese Chase or something like that. They do it every year. That actually just recently happened where it's a very steep hill and they just chuck a giant wheel of cheese, and you gotta run after the cheese. And I believe the first person down the hill who doesn't end up in the hospital across the finish line gets the wheel of cheese. The Revel races are kind of like that, except with the wheel, instead of a wheel of cheese, it's a shiny BQ. Mm-hmm. But the problem is so Revel right now, and we've reached out to Revel. I'd love to talk to them. I'm very curious to see how they're going to pivot from this, because as you said, Caitlin, I think a big part of their business was facilitating a kind of best opportunity to run a BQ, right?
Right.
They have 4 races listed. They've got Big Cottonwood, Big Bear, Mount Charleston. They've actually only got 3 listed currently because they sunsetted the New Hampshire race that you're on, the White Mountains race. Mm-hmm. And they're in California, Utah, and Nevada. And all 3 of their races will be affected either by a 5-minute penalty, a 10-minute penalty, or in the case of the Revel Mount Hood race, which they've run in the past, it's uncertain whether they'll run it now, that has a 6,100 foot drop. So that race is just ineligible. You can't run it for a BQ any longer. So races like this in the United States and around the dozens in the United States that we've found, and then certainly dozens more around the world that position themselves as being Boston qualifiers and have extreme net downhill advantage to them, are just getting wiped out here. Question for you guys. Do you think people will still run these races? And do you think these races will survive? Do you think the Revel series will survive after this change?
Ugh, I think this is a big curveball for them. I wonder what motivates most people to run good times. And I think the BQ is huge. And aside from that, I think that a big part of the appeal of a new PR is to have that legitimized by your friends, your running friends. And as soon as a race is deemed ineligible for the BQ, a second thing happens. The connotation of the race changes. It's an illegal race, right? It's kind of like racing with a super shoe with 2 separate carbon plates. It's an illegal shoe. And so if you run with that shoe, it doesn't really count. And so I don't know, then it becomes like, well, what's the purpose of these Revel races? What's the payout for you? Like, do you want to go and get a shiny PR that no one really validates or understands or recognizes as true? I'm nervous for them. Yeah.
Yeah, because I was thinking the same thing, Alex. I was like, well, you'll have plenty of people who still want to go out and get their PR, right? But even, I think I had mentioned this on a previous pod, like here in Costa Rica, every few months or so, we get the new list of the fastest marathoners in the country. And I remember that list comes out and there is an asterisk next to the names of people who have run a net downhill race. So even before this whole thing came in with the BAA, if you ran a Revel race, your name will be there, but it will have an asterisk next to it saying that this race had a net downhill. And so you're almost even, called out on it in the standards, at least here, for your PR times overall in the country if you run a race like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and expect that to become even worse because, like it or not, I think the BAA and the Boston Marathon are massive leaders of the running culture, right? When they say something that does carry some weight. And so if the BAA begins to really take elevation into account, watch the rest of the running world starting to slowly do the same. So
I got to give a shout out to a site, downhillmarathons.com, which has indexed itself all of the it seems like only American races from what I can see, but it has a comprehensive list of total elevation loss, elevation gain, and net elevation loss, the important number to factor in here. We'll put it in the notes in the description for you to take a look at as well. And the wild thing is here, because the BAA decided to draw a line in the sand at 1,500 feet, and then anything 1499 and below counts still as a Boston qualifier. I'm now eyeballing races like the Steamboat Marathon in Steamboat Springs, Colorado. Congratulations to the race directors of the Steamboat Springs race. With a 14:06 net elevation loss, you have now become one of the most desirable Boston qualification courses in the world. And I can imagine you're going to sell out pretty easily in 2025 and 2026 because it now becomes the next best thing, which leads me to the next question for you guys, which is, by drawing a hard line at 1,500 feet, instead of creating a trajectory or like a scale that you can evaluate and then judge against, is the BAA kind of rewarding races to like figure out a course that walks right up to that line but doesn't go beyond it? Instead, should we be like grading all elevation and providing a number based on that? So say I run the California International Marathon for qualifying, and it's a 400-foot net downhill course. You could do a math equation that could figure out what my time penalty is for 400 feet versus 0, right?
Yeah, you could figure out per foot or per meter. But I mean, can you imagine into the nitty gritty that you could get in with all this information? I mean, just with your Strava, okay, you have the gap pace, you have your grade adjusted pace. I look at this all the time being a trail runner, and because my most recent runs have had 1,500 meters of gain. So I like to look at that grade adjusted pace to see if I were on flat ground, what would my pace be roughly? And of course, it's not going to be perfect, but I'm sure that it's pretty accurate. So I always do this. For example, this weekend I have a trail race. It's a 50-kilometer race, but it's not a 50-kilometer race. It's a 50-kilometer race, and it has 4,300 meters of gain. Okay, so we are way up there. Yeah, it's going to be brutal. So if we use my equation that I've mentioned before, and for every 100 meters, you add 1 kilometer of flat distance, instead of running 50K, I'm really running about 93 to 95K this weekend. So I have to think that my time is going to, for planning purposes, is going to be roughly that. So I know that that's an extreme case, but I'm saying that we could take every single race and we could look at those factors and we can say, okay, but what about uphill? So can I be rewarded? Can I be rewarded for all of the meters I run uphill? Why just look at the net downhill? I mean, if you wanted to get into it, you could calculate every single race exactly, but that would just be crazy logistics.
Yeah, I see both sides. Like, I think on one side of it, it's weird that the BAA is not doing that. Like, when you think about it, they already do that in terms of age, right? There are age graded scores, the Boston Marathon. And if you run something at 70 years old, it means something different than if you run it at 40 years old. And so why not transfer that into elevation? I think maybe,
let's do age graded.
Let's do it.
Caitlin and I let's do age graded. Let's age grade all the scores. Suddenly my times look better.
Well, meaning that you can get into the Boston Marathon with a slower time if you're 60 than if you're 50.
They already do that.
Which they do.
Right.
That's what I mean. So they already do that. And so why don't they do that for elevation? I wonder if they were just afraid of the fringes. Like, if you just add a converter that even goes both ways, uphill and downhill, like, in theory, you could have someone just like hike up a super steep hill and then have it converted all the way down to like a 2:45 marathon and have them qualify. And then on the other side of things too, you can have Buddy in the UK chasing down the cheese wheel for 42 kilometers and somehow still qualifying because they're going so downhill.
They ran a 220 and they're more of a 240 runner, but they just ran down a side of a mountain sure.
Exactly. They do the Truett Haynes, the jeans guy who just ran a half marathon almost faster than I can run one, which I still refuse to believe until I can out bench press the guy, and that's never going to happen. So I don't know. I still think it's good that the BAA imposed some type of rule. Before then, it was the Wild West. It sucks that I think some races are really going to struggle, but this brings me back to 2017, 2018, when the world of running saw another type of ruling being posed, and that was the Supershoes. And it was going from, again, the Wild West, nothing at all, no ruling whatsoever, to foreseeing a future where companies would just hijack the landscape and create shoes that are faster and faster. And maybe the BAA saw something. They saw more and more people basically capitalizing from these downhill races and more downhill races being created and having others qualify who maybe can't run a BQ on flat. They're downhill specialists.
So, I mean, super shoes came to mind right away when this new rule came out. Because for me, when someone was recently asking me about the experience of running the California International Marathon, what was it like? I hear it's a net downhill. I hear it's pretty easy for a marathon. And I've run it once before. I'm actually considering running it this year. I think it's a wonderful race. It's extremely well organized. It totally caters to the three of us, people who are very goal-oriented, veteran runners, want to run a fast marathon, want to really challenge themselves and see how well they can do. But it is a gentle race. And I have to say, the first thing that came to mind, because I ran that race pre-Supershoe, I had a weird experience in the last 10K of that race where it didn't feel as hard as other marathons in the last 10K of the race. I didn't have to work as hard in the last 10K. And that got me thinking, what's the best comp for the experience of running CIM? And I was like, oh, it's like running in a pair of super shoes. It is generous. It is doing something for you that you previously couldn't do for yourself. And this rule change is really interesting. It's interesting also that they've not banned super shoes. I mean, I don't think they can put the toothpaste back in the tube. And obviously, Adidas, who are major sponsors of the Boston Marathon, they make some super shoes and they make some money off of them. So they're not going to be like, hey, you know what we should do is ban super shoes in order to bring the qualification numbers down. I don't think so. So, but that does lead me to another question for you guys, which is, let's just have fun with this because this is not going to happen. And I actually kind of hope it doesn't happen. What other indexing would you guys apply to the marathon? We all have run a race into the wind, and then you just see that ugly result number just wrecking your beautiful resume. And you have to, like, you want to put an asterisk by it, and you want to say, no. And every conversation that comes up, and someone's like, yeah, you ran Boston that year. It was looked like a tough time. What year was that? You're like, oh, that year, bad headwind, horrible headwind. Do we want to see indexing for headwinds or tailwinds?
Could you
kind of like the 100 meter, like 100-meter sprinters, they do a time adjustment for a tailwind, right? What do you think?
Yeah, you could play that out and get to a place where there's indexing for everything, and then every race becomes perfectly fair. Like indexing for the elevation, indexing for the wind, indexing for the temperature, the heat or the cold, anything that's the humidity, anything that's off from 8 degrees Celsius gets a type of grade adjustment on either side of things. And then you can you get to this weird utopia where you can compare every single racing result. You get a score. It's not even a time. It's like you scored 912 out of 1,000 based on your time and also the heat and the elevation, all this stuff. I hope we don't get there because one part of racing is exactly how you do against the elements of that day.
Yeah.
Yes.
I don't want to see it. But you know what we need? We need a positive index for that dude who ran with no super shoes, like the guy who finished a recent marathon who had the fastest finish with no super shoes. You got to get him like a 10-minute bump.
Absolutely. I'm just pulling up his name here because I want to give him a quick shout before we
his
move on.
name escapes me.
Scott Lipp. A true legend, ran 2:42:33, was by all accounts the fastest non-super shoe wearer in the 2025 Boston Marathon, was rocking a pair of Topo Atmos everyday running shoes, and just legendary stuff. Yeah, that guy should get a time discount. He should get some sort of metric. He's sub 240 for sure if he's wearing super shoes.
Whatever his 4% is, calculate that and take it right off the top.
Yeah. All right. So in closing here, what do you think? Do you think that this is fair? This is a fair move by the the Boston Athletic Association, and you think the timing is good for it. How do you feel about it, Caitlin?
I mean, it's tricky to say because everyone's going to have strengths and weaknesses depending on the kind of race that they want to run. And like Alex just mentioned, a ton of different factors. So, if it's 25 degrees Celsius, 35 degrees Celsius, if it's 8 degrees Celsius, every tailwind, headwind, everything's going to have a factor. But I think the elevation drop was the easiest factor to kind of try and control. So we know that for most people, it's probably going to give them some sort of, and as the BAA is seeing it, as an unfair advantage. And they're just trying to level the playing field for everyone. So those who are running the flat races feel the same. Now, yeah, maybe I feel that a downhill race would be easier for me than a flat race because I like running downhill and it's one of my strengths. But maybe for someone else, that's not going to be their strength. But what they're just trying to do is level out the playing field a little bit, and they're trying to make it even harder without saying, okay, we're also going to take another 5 minutes off the times, right? I mean, they already slapped us with that, and they're trying to make, I think, some other parameters just to tighten it up a little bit. And that's the easiest way that I think that they could do it. And if you still really like running downhill, like you're saying, Michael, run that marathon, the CIM, or try to find a marathon that's, the one in Colorado, right? So you can do 1,400 and something feet. So the great thing is that you still can do a net downhill marathon. You just have to keep it within the parameters. So if you still like that advantage, go ahead and take it and just stay within the 1,500 feet.
Yeah, I think it's fair to 3,000 feet, 5,000 feet. That's a lot. That's a lot. The BAA didn't attack itself at slightly downhill courses. Right. They went for the fringe here. So I think it's fair. I think this is one step that's going to lead to more because, as I think one of you mentioned a little while ago, I think this is going to make like these 1,400 feet of elevation races become super popular. Yes. And people are going to try to game the system. And I think eventually, maybe in 5 years, maybe in 50, I don't know, the BAA will feel compelled to create this gradient if they're serious about policing elevation. And I think that's where we're going. Maybe that would have been too much of a change right away. But I think that this is like step one, a barely pixelated version of what we're going to get in years to come.
Yeah, these races, like I'm just looking at this list here. The Cascade Express Marathon in North Bend, Washington, which is at 1,569 feet of net elevation loss. They just have to figure out a way to get remove 70 feet of net downhill from their course in order to be Boston legal. Right. And I actually don't mind that the BAA drew the line in the sand here. And we should give a shout out to Dr. Richard Smith at the University of North Carolina, who is a pretty dyed-in-the-wool runner and is a statistician and an expert in the field. And he worked with the BAA for the last 4 years analyzing data to come up with this indexing strategy. And I don't mind that they drew a line in the sand versus kind of going the gradient route, because if you start doing that gradient route, you're kind of losing the je ne sais quoi of the marathon, right? You're starting to get into kind of analytics a little bit too deeply. I do think that there's an opportunity for a platform like Strava, for the data heads, to get that score out of 100 or score out of 1,000, to really go deep on analyzing just like how well you did and how hard the course was and all of the different parameters. And I think that would be cool. Kind of like how you get a sleep score out of 100 and you're like, I got a 91. I did really well. Mm-hmm. You could get that as well in a really detailed way with a performance, especially a marathon, from something like Strava and your watch and then the data on the day. But I don't think the race needs to get involved in that. It's getting too in the weeds. Just have hard numbers and leave it at that. All right. I think we will leave it at that. And good luck to everybody on your Boston qualifying. And hopefully we helped unpack and explain the complexities of this big qualification change. And by all means, of course, follow what we do on our social channels, on Instagram, on our YouTube channel. Subscribe to our YouTube channel so that you get more content like this every day, and on our podcast, where we're available: Apple Podcasts, Spotify, you name it, we're there. All right, until next time, guys.
Bye.